Hello, Java Challenger. I'm honored to have here Geertjan. He's a Java champion. He is also an Apache NetBeans PMC Chair. He's been a technical writer, mostly focused on Java for Oracle, the Apache Software Foundation. Now he works for Azul as a senior director of open source projects, and he wrote the books Developer Advocate, Conversations on Turning a Passion for Talking About Tech into a Career, and Beginning NetBeans IDE for Java developers. He is also the community manager from Foojay, which means Friends of OpenJDK. And he's also the co-organizer from the Amsterdam Java group. Geertjan, you're very welcome. Thanks for coming here, and I'm happy to have you here. How are you?
Thank you for having me in your conversation series. I'm doing fine.
Amazing. So I always ask all the job experts I invite here to my channel. I'm very curious to know about their career trajectory, and I want to know yours. So can you tell me more about your career trajectory? What was the challenges, career lessons?
Yeah, I'm probably like quite a lot of people. I don't have a traditional IT career trajectory. I actually studied law. I grew up in South
Oh,
Africa. We moved there as a family when I was quite young. I ended up studying law and I was planning to do something in the legal profession. But then I went back to Holland to spend some time here before continuing with my legal and then ended up as a proofreader of technical documentation in Holland. And then I continued in that direction with proofreading and editing and technical writing and coaching and giving workshops. And I ended up much more in a technical writing direction, which ended up being kind of a community related role. In the 90s, if you were a technical writer, what you would be today is something more like developer relations or developer advocacy or community management. So I developed from being a technical writer to being something much broader around communications and developer relations and so on.
can you tell me more about the role of technical writer? Because, like you said, it's something that is it's quite rare in our area. So I would like to know more about how is the day-to-day work of a technical writer. What is the role exactly?
A technical writer, there's different kinds of roles. And actually, what makes it interesting is that if you're kind of a technical person, but at the same time, you enjoy working with people and conversations and community work and so on. And if you have this technical interest, but also a social interest, this combination of not necessarily wanting to spend your entire day programming, but you're a little bit more diverse, then technical writing is a good position to explore also because you end up learning a lot about an organization and about the technology. You're not very focused on one specific thing. So often, if you're an engineer, you become very specialized in the area that you're in your organization. But a technical writer needs to know something about everything across the different areas within the organization. So it's kind of diverse and it's somewhere in between different things. And if you're curious and you can't be fitted into a pigeonhole very easily, then it's an interesting area to explore. And there's many areas that branch out from being technical writer, like there's editing work, but there's also communication and there's community work in general, and there's developer advocacy, and there's all these developer relations roles and going to conferences and working on Java user groups or in general developer groups. So there's a lot of activities that you can build up from starting out or from being involved in technical writing.
Very good. You mentioned a very important skill I consider for experienced Java developers. And this is something I teach my mentees because I know it's crucial for their success, which is communication. So, what are the actions you take to become better with communication?
There's many different ways, many different responses I can think of, but I think maybe the key one is to communicate less, which is kind of ironic. But I think the less you communicate, the more what you do communicate is valuable. So don't over communicate would be one thing I would say. I mean, it depends on what we mean by communication exactly, and who are we communicating with and to, and who is our audience, and so on. But people are being communicated to all the time nowadays. I mean, on your apps, on your phone, on the web. So I think one crucial thing is to be very careful about what you communicate and when, and to who, and that you really get the right message to the right target audience, and that you get feedback on a high level, whatever it is that you're communicating. Just being very diplomatic and careful about not overburdening, not oversharing, not giving too much information, but just communicating less, actually.
And to communicate less, you need to think a lot more, right? Because
Yeah.
how do you craft your message to be concise and to be clear on your message and communicate your message effectively?
I mean, it's to some extent it's also based on experience, and it takes a long time to get to a place where you're comfortable with communication, whether it's technical writing or being persuasive and trying to get people to do things in the way that you think people should be doing things, or when you're collaborating on different things. Part of it is experience, I think, but
Yeah.
it's a journey. It's never complete. You're never quite there, and it's a question of being really thoughtful and careful about what you want to say and what's the purpose of your communication. What are you trying to achieve? What I often find is people who are quite new to a job or an industry or an organization are always over communicating, because you're constantly proving that you're valuable. So you're constantly sharing what you're doing and what you have done and what you're going to do. And it's sometimes more useful to think about what you want to communicate when, and dropping that message in at the right time, and maybe giving a monthly overview of your activities, for example, rather than continually saying, okay, now I'm going to do this, now I'm going to do that, now I'm going to, don't over communicate.
Yeah, I think that's a valuable advice, because if you over communicate, you might look like that annoying person that is always boasting
Yeah,
about their accomplishments, and it might backfire
yeah,
the person.
yeah,
So to be concise and send your message effectively is very important. But the other important lesson is also to communicate, right? Like, not to neglect what you are doing as well. So it's difficult to find this fine line to know how much you should communicate and how to deliver a message as effectively as
yeah,
possible.
yeah. Thinking about
Eh,
the message, about the target, and what you're trying to achieve, and it's never easy.
yeah, and I think one of the most effective tools to improve your communication skills is writing our ideas, because our ideas are all disorganized in our minds. But once we take the time to write them down and organize them in articles or books, it's much easier for us to communicate that when we are talking.
Yeah,
Because I think most people confuse the idea that they only learn communication by talking, but that's not true. Your communication skills improve through, could be talking as well, but it improves through talking, writing, and listening. People have so much trouble to listen nowadays, like in many jobs, many companies I worked for as a software developer. It's not uncommon to see people cutting each other because they want to talk first. They want to get the credit. And, that could be a sign of toxic culture. But, listening is also a very good communication skill. And some developers think that it's only when you talk, but it's not. It's when you listen as well. So,
yeah. I think also another interesting thing is that if somebody else makes your point, and people agree with them, then that's great. because they're moving in the direction that you think is great. You don't need to make the argument. Somebody else has made that argument already, and everyone now goes in that direction, and that's wonderful. I don't think you necessarily need to get the credit for an idea so long as the direction goes in the way that you think makes sense based on your experience.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, that's true. Uh, at the same point, it's important to try as much as possible to offer value in meetings or anything that's important for the project. But obviously, also to not be that person who is talking just because they need to talk.
Yeah.
Then they become the annoying person.
I think if you're in a meeting and you're the one that doesn't talk at all, except for once or twice, then the weight of what you're saying has much more value because you're not constantly talking. You're kind of placing your arguments into the right places, and I don't think but it takes a long time to get there. I think you need to be quite experienced. It's also a question not wanting to be pleasing all the time. You don't want to not want everyone to like you all the time, and it's not about that. It's about that the project or whatever it is that you're working on is going in the right direction, and sometimes it's because of your argument, and sometimes it's not. But it's about pacing your contributions, whether it is in code or it's in words or it's in meetings or whatever it is. It's not about the
Exactly.
lines of code, but it's not about the lines of code, but it's about the value of the contribution.
Exactly. And it could be in a few words, right? Don't need to be talking all the time and
Yeah.
just because of the sake of it. And also for people who have difficulties to contribute in a meeting, they can also take notes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
They can take notes from the highlights of the meeting and they can post on a wiki of the project and say, hey, here's what we discussed. Here are the highlights. Awesome. So you also mentioned, yeah.
Just another thing on what you just said. I think it's also the responsibility of whoever is organizing a meeting to give everybody a chance to say something. So if there is somebody who hasn't been contributing or in a discussion, that the person who is facilitating the discussion or anyone else would say, well, Rafael, what about you? What do you think? That you actually explicitly solicit people to participate if they're being a bit quieter.
Yeah, that doesn't usually happen for most companies, according to my experience.
Mm.
So basically, what I see is that the career of a developer depends on them. Like usually, there won't be a facilitator.
Yeah,
So,
sure.
but yeah, it would be great if sometimes there is. Sometimes there is a facilitator, but sometimes not. You also mentioned that you
Sorry,
are.
just on this point again, though, I think whether or not there's a facilitator, if you are in a team and you think somebody has a contribution to make and they're not making it because they're shy or introverted or there's no space because everyone is talking all the time, I think everybody in a meeting or in a community has the responsibility to say, hey, Joe, what do you think about this topic? Because I think everybody always has an opinion, and it's always good to hear everybody's opinion. And some people are a little bit hesitant to share their thought. But I think it's everyone's responsibility to try and bring everyone's ideas into the group.
Yeah, I really like your thoughts on that. And I would really like that people were like that. People
Mm-hmm.
had the same thoughts of you. But sometimes in companies, there is also conflict of interests, unfortunately. Like it's so like some people will think, oh, if I share here more, I will be closer to the promotion.
Mm.
Like I know that it's not all the companies, but there is still conflict of interests. And
Yeah.
it would be awesome if every leader were like you, right? So if they thought, okay, like let's listen to everyone here. Let's, let's hear everyone's voices. But
Yeah,
sometimes there are conflict of interests and they are thinking about themselves.
yeah,
Not every company though, but there are some companies that basically we can't be naive. We have to realize the situation that, okay, like there is a conflict of interest.
sure.
So we have to, this is something I don't like about the company is kind of political game, something that I hate. But if you are in a company that they play those games, it's, if you don't play, you might be that developer that never gets promoted. Unfortunately, it's a reality in our software development industry.
Yep.
But you also mentioned that you are originally from South Africa. So how was the move from South Africa to the Netherlands?
Well, it was actually both ways because I'm originally from Holland, and when I was quite
Oh,
young, we moved to South Africa, and then I grew up there and went to university there and studied law, and then I came back. So it was getting used to South Africa as a small child and getting used to Amsterdam again when I came back. But it's they both have their own thing. I mean, the weather is nicer in South Africa for sure, and but I like Amsterdam a lot. So I've really enjoyed living here.
that's interesting because I thought that most Dutch people would prefer living far from Amsterdam. I've been in Amsterdam. I loved it. It's amazing. Holland is an amazing country, but I don't know like how is to live in Amsterdam. It's the capital.
It's great. It's the best city. It's just my opinion, of course, but it's really nice. So much choice, restaurants, movies. It's a great place.
You have everything there.
Yes.
It's amazing. Yeah, I really like the Netherlands. It's such an advanced country. Like you can go to places so easily. Like you can get the train, you can get a bicycle. Like the whole city is connected, and it's so easy to move around. So secure. It's nice. I really considered. Maybe I'm still considering moving to Holland because I really enjoyed the country. So it's really nice. Yeah, so you stayed in South Africa and then you moved back to the Netherlands. So how long did you stay in South Africa?
15 years
15
from
years. Oh,
from when I was 8 years old until 15 years later.
wow. And do you miss living in South Africa or you really like Holland?
Sure. I mean, I like both places. Both are quite nice.
And so probably the only thing you miss is the weather.
Well, the weather, the country, it's really nice. Ocean, mountains, desert. It's large country, a lot of space. Yeah.
Awesome. So can you tell me more about the college course you had and how was the experience?
Well, I mean, I didn't study IT at all, or any programming or Java or anything. So I studied law and then learned Java on the job when I joined Sun Microsystems working on NetBeans. I was writing technical documentation for the NetBeans APIs and making training courses on the NetBeans platform. And that's where I started in the Java community, working in Sun and in NetBeans in Prague. But that's my background in programming.
That's very interesting. How was the transition from law to Sun Microsystems?
Well, I mean, it wasn't exactly like that. I studied law, and then I graduated. I didn't do anything with law. I didn't become a lawyer or something. I went straight from South Africa after my graduation to Holland to travel around, and then I ended up with my English background, proofreading and checking the English in manuals and things like that, and reading technical documentation and so on, and then gradually started writing some content and understanding what it was about, and kind of grew into the job as a writer.
Oh, so you went to Sun. Well, for sure you had technical knowledge to join Sun, right? Because
Yeah, I
Sun is
mean,
a very technical company.
Yeah, but between studying and joining Sun, I had 6 or 7 other positions. Initially as a technical editor, I was working in different companies, all in the programming space. And I mean, I was never a full-time programmer or anything, but I had enough technical knowledge and background built up over years of working in the industry that when I joined Sun, I clearly had that experience, which was enough to get started there.
Very good. And so nowadays, Foojay is huge. And I know that you have a huge experience with communities and you've done that a lot in your career. And I would
Yep.
like to know, how was the process of building such a big Java community with Foojay?
Yeah, well, when I was at Sun, we had a website called java.net. And Java.net was the one place you would go for all the information about Java, and about the community, and the download page from Sun, and there was a blog and an events calendar. And of course, since then, there's not just one company that provides Java. There's Oracle, there's Red Hat, there's Amazon, there's Microsoft, there's Azul, there's multiple places where you can get your Java from. So now there is quite a fragmented landscape, and there isn't a single place that you would go to about Java. And so there isn't really a community site until we worked on Foojay together. And so Foojay is really the place for anyone doing anything as a user of the OpenJDK. So Java developers, Kotlin developers, anyone using OpenJDK as the basis of their programming can go to Foojay, and every day there are new articles. There's a Slack channel, and there's a calendar, and there's events, activities of various kinds, a book being written. We're discussing a free open source academy. There's all kinds of community activities that can be launched through the website and through the Slack channel and through the people who are involved in this community.
And can you help the Java developers who are watching us now on how to contribute to Foojay?
It,
What's the process?
yeah, it's very simple, actually. I mean, on the simplest level, Foojay is a website, and it's a WordPress website. So you just go to the Slack channel, you join the Slack channel, and you say, hey, I have content, whether it's completely new content or content that you've already published in the past, as long as it's still correct and accurate for today and interesting. You would say, hey, I'm interested in publishing my content on Foojay. You say that on the Slack channel, you get a user and a password to the Foojay WordPress. You put your content into the queue, you leave it in the queue, and then every Monday we take a look at what is in the queue, and then we propose on the Slack channel a schedule for that week. So we say on Monday we'll publish this and this, on Tuesday we'll publish this. And more or less we keep to that schedule. It might be a day or two later or earlier. And so we publish about 10, something like between 5 and 10, 15 articles every week. And then we promote them on LinkedIn and on Twitter and on Blue Sky and on the social medias and so on. So we want to keep it low threshold and easy to get started.
That's awesome. I'm gonna leave the link of Foojay so that
Yeah.
if you Java Challenger wants to join Foojay, you can just click the link and join and start contributing to Java community, because that will help you in your career and you're gonna also contribute to other Java developers to know more. So that's awesome. And tell me more about the title of being an Apache NetBeans PMC Chair. So how does that work exactly?
So it's a long story, but so NetBeans started in Sun, and then Oracle took over Sun. And after some time, Oracle thought it was best to give the project to the community. And actually, NetBeans had always been open source. The sources were always available, but the decision-making process had always been driven by Sun and then by Oracle. So Sun and then Oracle decided what are the features in each release. Even though the code was open source and available for everyone to see, the decisions were made by Sun and then by Oracle. But putting the code into the Apache Software Foundation, it means automatically that the decisions are made by the Apache NetBeans community. So just like there's Apache Kafka and Apache Maven and Apache Groovy, and so many others. There's mailing lists, and there's release processes, and there's all kinds of protocols that you need to follow to securely and reliably release and distribute Apache code. And this is the process that has now been followed with NetBeans as well. And I was kind of the person in Oracle who was overseeing this process from Oracle to Apache. And the role of a PMC chair is basically administrative. So you're not actually the leader or something. You're the person that sends updates to the Apache Foundation about the status or if there are issues. And every quarter there's a report that you need to provide and things like that. But as a community, we're doing really well. And we have 4 releases per year. So it's really a time-based release schedule. And we're working together really well. There's contributors from all kinds of organizations. There's individuals. There's people from organizations. So it's a pretty good and stable direction that we've taken in Apache, and it's great that it's worked out like that. It's in fact the largest project in Apache in terms of source code. NetBeans has more source code than any other project in Apache, which is not necessarily a good thing, but that's a status that it has there.
Very good. I know also that James Gosling is very passionate about NetBeans. And I would like to know if you interacted with him by being the PMC chair. I assume that you might have worked with him. So how was the experience?
Yeah, well, James Gosling has really been the biggest promoter of NetBeans, and he, in fact, was the person who bought NetBeans as a student project in Prague in the 90s. So he is the one that identified that good urban environment to promote Java, because if you have a language, you need some kind of tools to promote it. And he identified this student project that was being developed at the Czech Technical University as the IDE that should be promoted and incorporated into Sun. And he more or less at some different points was the engineering director of NetBeans effectively within Sun. And also whenever there was Java 1 and these big conferences, we always try to have keynotes with James doing the keynote or having discussion panels about the new features and the direction. And always James was always very keen to highlight his usage. And I think his reasoning is the same as mine, that NetBeans is free, it's open source, it's community driven, there's no money behind it. It's really what an IDE or what a tool could be in terms of open source community, and anyone who has an affinity with those kinds of concepts of collaboratively developing tools and technologies in the open source with passionate people, the NetBeans fits that bill very well. And also what's always been great about it is that it's modular. So way before Jigsaw, NetBeans had a module system, and this is exactly what enabled us to donate it from Oracle to Apache in a staged manner, because if it had been a monolithic tool that was as large as it is, it would have been impossible to donate it in the stages that we did. So we were able to say, well, first we're going to take these 6 modules and we will donate those and go through that process. And then we'll donate this. So we were able to make milestones based on the functionality in the modules in NetBeans, which really simplified the really difficult process of getting all the licensing correct and making sure that the code we were donating was actually Oracle's code that didn't belong to somebody else. So we had to do all kinds of due diligence and so on, which was made possible by the modular architecture. So yeah, and James is still using NetBeans to this day. And whenever there's a new vote, the new release, he's one of the people who votes. So he's still actively involved in the project.
That's amazing to know that the father of Java uses NetBeans, and it's an amazing tool and very robust tool, and definitely one of the best IDEs in the market.
Yeah.
Amazing. So, Geertjan, can you tell me more about the book you wrote, The Developer Advocate: Conversations on Turning a Passion for Talking About Tech into a Career?
Yeah, it really. So at some point in my career, I ended up, because I was not just a technical writer, but in Sun, but I was also clearly very passionate about NetBeans and passionate about Java. And so different people, especially if people know Ludo Champenois who's now at Google. He was at Sun at that point. And he's one of the people who said, hey, you should go to Java 1 and you should talk about NetBeans there since you like it so much. And you can do workshops at Java 1 and get people started and things like that. And so I gradually ended up being a developer advocate, even though I didn't have that name. And I went to a lot of conferences around the world. I really traveled quite a lot. I'm not doing that anymore, and this is why I'm much more focused on Amsterdam right now and the local Java user group. But at the time, I was really traveling a lot to different conferences, and I met a lot of people, people who were speakers, people like Matt Rabel, Josh Lar, Arun Gupta, Shishaji, all these people that you see at these conferences. And I would see them over and over again. I would have interesting conversations, and I would wonder, how did these people get started being a developer advocate? Because there isn't really a developer advocate course or a degree or something. How did they become that? And what does it mean to be that? And what are the, what are the good and the not so good things about that life as a developer advocate? Not all developer advocates travel a lot, but a lot of them do. I mean, you can be a developer advocate in your local organization, in your local company, amongst your peers. But a lot of the developer advocates that you know about are the ones who are traveling to conferences all over the world. And so I had these conversations and I thought, wouldn't it be great to have a book in which we have a collection of interviews with these people, exactly like you are doing right now, actually. Let's have conversations with people and see what the common insights and lessons are and things to avoid and things to think about. And there's definitely some ethical things about being a developer advocate as well. There's some interesting topics like, what do you do if there's a bug in your application and you're doing a demo? Do you pretend that bug isn't there? Or what do you do if someone asks a question and you don't know the answer? You have a big room of people, you've done your presentation and you get this really difficult question. How do you respond? If you really don't know? So there's a bunch of interesting things like that. Or, what if the company you work for has done something that was really negatively in the news last week? And now it's in the weekend, you at a conference, you are from that company and people ask questions about the company that you work for. How do you respond? So there's a lot of interesting topics around developer advocacy aside from the travel so I interviewed a lot of these developer advocates and we put a book together and I'm quite happy we did that. But it would have been nicer maybe as a website with the possibility of linking between different interviews and, compare this to that. I think the actual physical book form is maybe not the best way to present this, but it was an interesting project and it's also dated. It's not like LeanPub or some, it was written now about, I don't know, 10 years ago or something. And all the people in the book are now doing different things. And you can't really update. You can't say, well, now Ivar Grimstad is doing this or whatever it is. So it's a moment in time book, but it's quite interesting nonetheless to hear, like Matt Rabel studied Russian. He doesn't have an IT background. A lot of people have come from different places in the world, but also in their educational backgrounds. And so somehow ended up in the IT world and somehow ended up being a developer advocate. And those journeys are really quite interesting.
That's amazing. But it also seems to me that your book has many principles that will never get outdated, right?
Yeah.
Because, and it's very likely that you can basically get most of the content you have in your book and publish a new version. And, it's going to deliver a lot of value because I don't think those principles will change. But one thing very important you told me is about how to respond to an answer you don't know when you're giving a talk. That's very hard, right? How do you approach this problem?
Yeah, well, I mean, this would be interesting, to have a collection of these answers to that question, but there's different responses. I mean, you could simply say, I don't know, or you could say, that's a good question, give me your contact details, I'll let you know afterwards. Or you could say, what do we think collectively? You can give the question back to the audience. Or you could say something like, well, I don't know the complete answer, but it involves the following things. And then you kind of discuss a couple of topics that relate to it, even though you don't know the complete answer. But I really like the idea of saying to the whole room, well, I don't know for sure it's about this and about that. What do you think? And the collective knowledge in the room is likely to have a complete answer to some extent for that question.
Yeah, those are good approaches.
it, it's also nice to say I don't know, because often when you go into a conference, you see a speaker on a stage, you assume that there is some kind of genius guru or something, but they're just a normal person, and often they don't know. And if they say I don't know, then maybe you feel more comfortable as the participant to also not know sometimes. I mean, nobody knows everything, and even if you specialize in something, you might not know the answer to something sometimes. And it's, it's the beginning of new knowledge, so it's an exciting thing to not know.
Exactly. Yeah, we just need to know how to handle haters because sometimes they exist even in the Java community. And like we need to know how to answer them. But those are good approaches. I like them because that's true, right? So like speakers, they are normal developers. Like it doesn't mean that they know more than other senior developers. It's just, the difference between a speaker and a developer is that the speaker decided to share their knowledge. So it doesn't mean
Yeah,
that they are
exactly.
super empowered developers. They just chosen to share their knowledge.
Yeah.
So
So it's really nice to be a speaker because it forces you to really understand what you're talking about. I mean, you're interested in a particular topic and you think that you understand it, but you don't know that you understand it until you explain it to somebody. So
yeah,
it really forces you to think logically about, okay, and to find the gaps in your knowledge and to have a sequence. It's really a nice way to force yourself to understand what it takes to get started with something or whatever it is.
yeah, this is what I tell my mentees. I know that many developers they don't like to share their knowledge because we are developers. Most of us are introverted, so we don't like to be exposed. But I always tell them that it's important to share their knowledge because once they start sharing their knowledge, it's like having an ultra powerful CV. It's like because like the truth is that perception is reality, right?
Mm.
So whenever you are speaking about anything, you don't need to be the expert about that area, but if you're giving a talk about that subject, you are the expert. It doesn't really matter. So that's one of the most powerful things about being a speaker because once you give a talk, you gain trust from other developers. And I also tell my mentees that if they don't want to expose themselves in a conference, at least it's very good to share their knowledge within their companies because then it become a reference. Then you are able to multiply your knowledge. And it's much easier to get a promotion to grow in their careers like that. Because if they are always hiding what they know, like the perception from other people won't help them too much in their careers. So, but this is amazing. I really agree with you that if we are sharing content, we fill out the gaps and we learn so many things we thought we knew, but we didn't. So, what would you say for a Java developer to start giving talks?
I think that's the starting point is exactly as you say, to start in your own company doing talks to your colleagues. If you have like a brown bag lunch or some internal community event, often you have internal developer conferences. And the next stage is to go to a Java user group. So in Amsterdam, we have one. We meet at least once a month, sometimes more, in different companies. And then after that, to go to the local conferences. And that's where it begins. You just take small steps and like that.
Amazing. Tell me more about the Amsterdam Java user group. Is it there are many Java developers motivated to learn? How are the meetings? How is the experience of being a co-organizer?
It's really great. I mean, since I stopped traveling to conferences around the world, I've really enjoyed doing the local jug. And so, as I said, we have about one meetup a month. We try to go to different companies. So one time we were at ING, another time we were at Atlassian or at Elastic, or there's so many companies in Amsterdam, so it makes it easy. And sometimes we have a lunch session as well, because people don't come, not everyone can come in the evenings. And we get about 70, 80 people per meetup. So it's quite a big jug. Yeah, and it's really an enjoyable experience. And quite a few people come back every time. There's always food and drinks, and it's a networking opportunity. And I've really enjoyed it a lot.
Amazing. How do you make the attendance be so high? Because usually it's quite challenging because, it's very common to see no shows on Java user group. So what is your strategy to make people committed?
Yeah, it's always quite difficult. I think, if there's room for 150 people, let's say there's a room for 100 people at this particular meetup. And it differs for us every time, because every time we're at a different company. We try to go to different organizations. So one time we were at IKEA, next time we were at Rabobank, and next time we were at somewhere else. So it's interesting because you see these different work environments from the inside, which is really nice. But it's really difficult. I mean, there's about 50, 60% show up rate normally. So if there's 100 people that are signed up, probably about 50 to 60 will turn up. So you have to try and overbook. So don't close the meetup enrollment at the exact same number as the number of places that are available. So if there are 100 places available, maybe you should risk making 150 seats available, because you know that about half of them will show up. So really overbook. And if you have too many people, then that's a luxury problem to have. But I've not seen that happen yet. So just make more space available on the meetup site than is available in the room, I think.
Have you ever considered charging a symbolic price as a matter of commitment? Because what happens is that, unfortunately, if an event is free, people will say, "Oh, I don't need to go." But
I
if
know.
they are paying something,
Yeah. So we do two other things. The one is we only announce the meetup typically 3 weeks in advance. So, and 3 weeks in advance, you kind of know whether you're going to actually be there or not. It's not 3 months in advance. So typically we announce it 3 weeks in advance. The other thing is we send a mail a week before or a couple of days before the actual meetup. We would say, please, if you're not going to be there, please deregister. And we really push people to deregister if they won't make it. But yeah, one thing that we could do is like charge like €5 per meetup, and then we give that money back when they come to the meetup. Like when they arrive, they get their €5 back. So just but if I can't make it and I've paid €5, then I just won't go. I mean, how much would it need to be to make it worthwhile? Maybe something like try and get swag. Like people will be guaranteed to get swag if they come. I don't know. To some extent, it's you can't really solve it 100%, this issue. But I think as long as you have about 40 or 50 people at your meetup, that's a good turnout anyway.
yeah, but it's 50% less. It's a lot. So I personally don't see an issue for them to pay the symbolic price because, I don't think it's necessary to get the money back to them because, like, we are developers. We have good salaries.
Yeah.
And also,
Maybe,
like, like,
yeah.
the talks are high quality. So it's
Yeah.
like the value from a Java user group meeting is exponentially higher than the €5 or whatever the price. So it could be something beneficial because
Yeah.
like we
And
did
would
that.
you think
We
that
did
€5?
We did that at DubJug,
For how
and
much?
I think it's something around 15 euros. 15 euros talk, something like that. It's symbolic because, like developers have a good salary. So, like, and every time you go to the meetup, you have pizza, you have beer, you have the talk, you have a whole infrastructure there. So, it's even cheap if you go to a pub to buy 2 pints or whatever.
Yeah.
It's going to
Yeah.
be more expensive, and you won't have the talk, you won't have the networking, you won't have
Yeah.
the pizza. So it's a symbolic price. It's just basically to create the commitment. Otherwise, unfortunately, people will devalue what is free. They'll say, "Oh, it's raining. Oh, it's raining. I'm not going." So anything
So
is an excuse, unfortunately. So I don't know. It's just food for thought.
it could be a good idea. It's a good idea, maybe also because even if somebody doesn't come, then they've still paid 15 euros, and you can do something as a jug with that money. If
Yeah,
you don't show up, you've still contributed, you've still given money, and we can use that for the pizza or for the t-shirts or something.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah, maybe.
because yeah, I think that's the best approach because that creates a commitment, and it's a big commitment for the speaker as well.
Yeah.
So, and for the community, like it's huge effort. I know how it is. Like you have to find the speaker, you have to contact the company, have to organize, have to host people, you have to introduce the speaker. You need to make sure that the speaker show up at the right time. You need to promote the talk, which is not easy work. It's a lot of work. So,
Yeah.
in my perspective, it's fair. Like it's nothing, it's just symbolic price. So, how is a day-to-day job of a director in Azul? Can you tell me more about that?
Well, it depends on what your role is. It's not a fixed, depends on what area you're focused on. But in my case, a lot of it is it's mostly working on Foojay and looking at which articles are available and polishing the articles, editing articles, interacting with the community on the Slack, finding organizations who want to participate. It's connected into the Amsterdam Jug and doing Amsterdam Jug work. So it's this community work is what my focus is.
Oh, that's awesome. And so Foojay is your core responsibility.
Yeah, definitely.
Amazing. And how did you do to be able to invite so many top references in our area to write for Foojay?
Well, I think people like communicating. People have content. A lot of people have their own blogs. You have a limited reach, I think, with an individual blog, but you have much more reach if you collaborate with others and you share your knowledge and they cross promote it together with you. So I think it's the collaborative effect of the community that makes it interesting to work on Foojay together.
Awesome. So you mentioned that you've been a technical writer most of your career. Can you tell me more about the experience of being a technical writer?
I've really enjoyed it. It's been an interesting career. I hadn't expected to be a technical writer in different ways or a communicator for as long as I have been. It's sometimes a bit difficult to get everyone aligned and taking documentation or communication as a higher priority. Not everyone agrees that it's not as important as code documentation. So it's always a question of getting the balance right. But in general, it's been a really interesting career to have. And I would recommend it to anybody who is technical, but who also likes communicating a lot and interacting with people and sharing knowledge. If you enjoy sharing knowledge, then technical writing is a really good option.
Awesome. And how was your biggest challenges in your career? If you remember one challenge that stood out and you said, oh, that was very difficult to overcome, can you share what would be this challenge?
Well, I think one big challenge has been the role of open source within large corporations. So, NetBeans within Oracle, for example, or there's many examples. People are very passionate about the open source projects that they work on. But often you find the project that you're working on being part of a larger corporation, which doesn't have the project as its highest priority, but they typically see the open source work you do as a nice to have, but not as a must have. And so as soon as there are other priorities, suddenly you're supposed to be working on other things. And at the same time, those large corporations use open source technology as the basis of the technologies that they develop. So I've always found it quite frustrating, the abuse of open source by large organizations who profit and benefit from those technologies, but don't contribute back to them to the extent that they could or should.
Interesting. Can you tell me more about that? So, how Oracle would profit from NetBeans, for example?
Well, I mean, I think in general, it would be great if we as developers within large organizations or in your organization would together give some kind of fair trade mark to the organization that you work in. So it's not only about the organization using open source and not contributing back to it, but also it's often there are great developers in an organization who need to spend all of their time on that corporation's technology and who work as a hobby or in their free time on open source. It would be much better if the organization were to give a certain percentage of time, like maybe like even like a Friday, something like that, to the developers to work on the open source projects that the organization itself uses as the basis of their own technology. So an Oracle or a Google or a Microsoft or whatever, profiting from the open source stack that is part of their technology, but not actually contributing back to it, except by having very passionate people who do that in their free time or as a hobby or whatever. So it would be nice if we as developers working in these kinds of organizations would give a kind of rating to the organization that you work for. So, the developers at Oracle together give Oracle this kind of rating. But it's a little bit risky as well, because do you want to give your own organization a bad rating? But some way of seeing like a fair trade symbol, some organizations getting a stamp of approval from the community that they contribute actively back to open source, that the developers in that organization are allowed or are encouraged actually to actively spend time on those projects during work hours, and that they list on their website, we use the following open source technologies, a long list, and it's very public, on the Microsoft.com, on the Oracle.com, on the homepage or somewhere. There's a page listing all the open source dependencies and the contributions back that are made to those projects. Because that picture of this very complicated infrastructure of architecture, and right at the bottom there's this small piece and this critical piece that is made by some random guy in a basement in Nebraska, purely on a security and reliability level. Do you want your entire infrastructure to depend on some piece that some guy wrote as a hobby at home? Or would you rather have the open source pieces that are part of your infrastructure being developed by the same people who are making that entire architecture available? So there needs to be still, I mean, it's been talked about for years, but this has been my biggest frustration, this misuse and abuse of open source by large corporations who don't really give it the priority in terms of time and money that they should.
And what is the reason they don't focus on open source projects? Because if they are having profit, what would be the reason?
Well, I mean, it's very difficult to make a direct line between those projects and revenue. I mean, Oracle doesn't earn anything directly from, didn't, when NetBeans was part of, this is one of the issues with NetBeans in Oracle. Oracle didn't earn any money from NetBeans. It was a free open source project. And so it was given a very low value. And like, why should we spend time and money on this thing that we don't earn any money from? And that's the reason why it ended up being moved into Apache, which I'm very happy about, and many people are happy about. But the reasoning behind it is like that, and many projects are in the same place. and that's not so great.
Yeah. So yeah, it depends on the company.
It's any
Yeah,
organization whether somehow benefiting from. I mean, Oracle had a lot of benefit from NetBeans as well, and so it
yeah.
could have considered NetBeans to be of value because it's the basis of many other tools now inside Oracle. It's used in many different places, but it's the same is true for many other open source technologies.
Yeah, that's a complicated subject because it depends on the company culture, depends like on their business plan, like their business model. So it's yeah, very complicated subject.
Yeah.
But for example, Apache is focused on open source, so like this is not a problem for Apache. So
Apache isn't a corporation like Microsoft or Google or Amazon. It's a foundation where people voluntarily work on projects. It's not a for-profit organization.
yeah, it's different.
Yeah.
Awesome. So how do you see Java in the future?
Well, it looks a lot like Java is a key piece of backend infrastructure of engineering platforms increasingly, even though the front end could be done in JavaFX and on mobile. So, I mean, the pieces are there for a much stronger front end story. But in terms of doing large processing in all kinds of organizations, with the increased release cycle and the innovation and the new features coming in all the time, and the innovation and the community around it, and the tooling around it, and the libraries, and the decades of experience that people have. I think it's very stable, and that's what you want to have when you create mission critical applications. You don't want to throw something together. You want something that has the community and the libraries and the tools and the direction and the roadmap. So all the pieces are there, and I think Java's in a very strong position.
Definitely, yeah. There are many companies backing up Java as well, like Oracle, Azul. We have Microsoft, Amazon, IBM. So all of those big companies, it is from their interest to keep Java strong. So Java has a bright future for
Yeah.
sure, because nowadays it's one of the most robust programming languages to build reliable microservices.
Yeah.
Awesome. So what books would you recommend for Java developers?
There are so many. Well, I like Clean Code by Robert Martin, but all the standard ones, I suppose. I think Heinz Kabut has great courses, for example, that you can take. But yeah, there's just too many to mention. Any book that gets you started enjoying and playing with Java is a book that you should take.
Do you have your book in a physical form?
Yes.
Yeah, because we can show your book.
Here it is.
Awesome. Yeah, so can you just show the author name as well?
Developer Advocate.
Yeah, great.
Conversations on turning a passion for talking about tech into a career.
Yeah, so this is an excellent book if you want to become a developer advocate, because Geertjan added the principles, he interviewed top developer advocates, and we're going to learn a lot in this book to follow this career path. So amazing. Do you have another book to recommend other than yours, obviously, and Clean Code?
So, Java Basics by Shai Almog,
Great.
and also another book on developer relations, The Business Value of Developer Relations by Mary Thingvall.
Okay, what is this book about?
Well, its title describes it, but why would you do developer advocacy? And how do you measure success? Which is a whole other topic. But yeah, it's about metrics, and it's about how to persuade an organization to invest in developer advocacy.
Sounds very interesting. It seems to me that it's another important book for people who want to become a developer advocate.
Definitely. Very good book.
Amazing. So, Geertjan, let's talk about the career lessons you learned throughout your career. So, can you give some insights from career challenges, career lessons you learned so that other Java developers can benefit from your lessons and they can learn, they can do better in their careers?
What would be some examples from your point of view?
So, for example, in my career, one of the most important thing was to be persistent and kind of have low expectations.
Mm,
Because when I came to Dublin the first time, I knew it would be difficult. It's a different culture, different language. Everything was different. And I wasn't expecting to pass my first interview, for example, and I didn't. So to have this low expectation was crucial to not give up, right? Another lesson was, for example, to understand that something about we already discussed. We talked about conflict of interest. Like I learned that I was too naive. It was difficult for me to get a promotion because I thought, oh, people are just being nice, but sometimes not.
yeah,
So, like those kind of lessons, like lessons in your career that you notice that, okay, I learned this lesson. Now it's easier for me to advance in my career.
yeah. Well, I think it's very important to think about the business of the organization that you're joining and whether it aligns with your values. And do you really want to be developing code for industry X or Y if you don't really agree with that? If you're not so excited about it, you really need to think about the value add of the organization as a whole and whether you feel comfortable contributing to that. Because you can obviously earn more in certain kinds of organizations than in other organizations. But if what they're doing doesn't align with your values, then you can become very burnt out very quickly. Because at some point in your career, you kind of look back at what you've done, and it's not, I mean, you can write code anywhere. I mean, whatever code you write in whatever organization is going to be very similar to the code you write in another organization. It's going to be maybe a different framework or a different approach, but I think if you look back and you're not too happy about the choices you made in terms of the organizations you joined, when you can join a healthcare organization, which you might feel better about than necessarily some kind of other organization. So I think you need to think about that. And also the other thing is I learned a lot in terms of building up a network and working in communities in large organizations like Oracle. I really had a good time. I got a lot of benefit from working for Oracle, for example. But I mean, currently I'm an independent contractor, and on that basis, I'm working at Azul and at other places. So once I think at the beginning of your career, it makes sense to be in a large organization, a large enterprise, and to move from one large organization to another, because those organizations are quite big, and so you're going to meet a lot of people and learn a lot of different things about how different people work in different cultures. But maybe later on, you in your career, you want to really focus on a startup, for example, with a team that's really small, and you're doing something that you really believe in and that you're really passionate about. But if you do it the other way around, then you haven't yet learned the lessons that are relevant to what you would do in a smaller group. So I think it makes sense to start in a larger organization and to learn in that context, in that environment first, and get the most out of that, and then to move to smaller organizations.
How to figure out your values?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think intuitively, to some extent, what are you excited about? Maybe that's a starting point. What are you passionate about? I've always been really passionate about bringing people together and doing community work, and the kind of jugs and the conferences and the online and in person, and I like being on my own. I do feel I'm introverted, but at the same time, I do enjoy interacting and communicating. I mean, that's personally what I'm passionate about. So anything that is about community and about networking and about eating pizza together is something that I wouldn't call it my value, but it's community is a value, maybe. Sharing is a value of, definitely a value of mine. Sharing knowledge and listening to people and hearing about their experiences, those kinds of terms are relevant to me. But to somebody else, it might be more about being really focused and disciplined and working in great detail on a particular project, and in isolation, and really bringing the project forward and really bringing it to a new level. That might be your thing, which is a different thing. And I think it has to do with personality as well. What kind of personality do you have, and what makes you most interested, or what are you most passionate and excited about?
Amazing. Geertjan, thank you so much for your answers, for your time, and for sharing your experience. And I hope to soon see you
Yeah, I'm
in a
sure.
conference or in a Java community, in a Java event. And yeah, I really enjoyed our chat. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Cheers.